more expensive, harder to get, more environmentally risky stuff for later. Well, guess what? It's later. Here's Australia's situation. As I'm sure you all know well, your country was an oil exporter for a couple of years back in the 1980s, but as Australia consumes more oil these days, it has to import more oil. And of course, the line, the queue of oil importing nations is lengthening with each passing year, and there are some bullies who want to elbow their way to the front of that line. Let's go here. So there is a very strong link now between the economy and oil prices. The vertical gray bars are recessions in the U.S. since 1970. And as you'll see, there have been several oil price spikes since 1970, and they correlate very well with the beginnings of these recessions. Now, there have been recessions that aren't correlated with oil price increases, but the reverse is not true. There hasn't been a single occasion since 1970 when we've seen a rapid increase in oil prices when we haven't seen a recession. Most famously, obviously, just 2008, we saw the price of oil skyrocket up to almost $150 a barrel. And just a couple of months later, in September 2008, of course, the famous GFC, global financial crisis. Now, this is our situation in a nutshell. The oil industry now needs prices over $100 a barrel in order to justify bringing on a new barrel of oil's worth of production from unconventional sources, whether it's ultra-deep water, tar sands, or whatever. But meanwhile, we know from recent economic history, if the price of oil goes above $100 and stays there for very long, it starts to undercut economic growth. So just on the basis of this one factor alone, global oil prices, there's reason to think that we may be hitting some kind of fundamental limit, at least over the short term, until we can find something to replace oil. But that's going to be hard to do for a while. And in fact, I'd argue that there aren't any good substitutes for oil from an economic standpoint on the horizon. But that's not the only thing that's happening. We're also seeing a global debt crisis. Now, what is that about? Let me explain it to you with a story. The story starts in the early part of the 20th century. The problem then was overproduction. With cheap energy and powered assembly lines, it was possible to make consumer products in larger quantities than people were accustomed to buying them. So how to solve this problem? Well, one strategy that was hit upon was advertising, talking people into wanting more stuff. And there were subsidiary strategies like planned obsolescence, making consumer products that would reliably break down before they really had to, so that you'd have to replace them, or making consumer products so they change appearance every year and everyone would want to have the latest model. Now this is an ad for a 1910 Studebaker. And a 1910 Studebaker cost about $900. That doesn't sound like much to pay for a new car today, but in 1910, $900 was a lot of money. It was much more money than people were accustomed to paying for, well, what was at that time a luxury item. So even though factories were capable of turning